This is chapter 4 of The Night Singer. 4. The morning meeting had been brought forward an hour, and Eric Lingen climbed the stairs from the cafeteria with his second coffee of the day. He had run 10 kilometers this morning and his thighs were aching. His time had been slightly better than yesterday's, just over 47 minutes. Eric was happy with his job here in Kalmar. 3 years ago, back in Malmö, his life had been far more stressful, chasing the witnesses and perpetrators of various shootings around the city. He'd barely had time to work out. Supriya, his wife, had never liked Malmö. She had spent their first year there learning Swedish, but once she was finally granted her license and began working as a dentist, things had gone downhill. She had struggled with the language and the working culture and had hated all the conflicts with her colleagues. Eric had tried to explain that perhaps she had just been unlucky ending up where she had, but it was only once she had changed jobs that she finally accepted that he was right. Sometimes he wondered whether she still longed for Mumbai, which was where they had lived before moving to Sweden. Stepping into the investigation room, he saw a woman he didn't recognize. Eric realized she must be the new detective from Stockholm and went over to introduce himself. Standing at just over 6 feet, he was surprised to see that Hannah Dunker was taller than him. "Have you met Ove yet?" he asked. The question was hardly a difficult one, but Hannah hesitated before nodding. Eric moved over to his desk. There were 5 team members working in the room, but he had one of only 2 standing desks and put down his cup by his computer. He logged in. "Did he show you where the watering hole is?" It was obvious that Hannah had no idea what he was talking about. "Where to get coffee," he explained. She nodded. "Well, let me know if you need anything." Another nod. Eric glanced at the clock on his desktop. Almost 9:30. He quickly skimmed through his emails and then logged out. "Did he tell you where the morning meeting is?" he asked Hannah, who was now sitting at a desk he assumed had been assigned to her. "Yes," she said. As Eric left the room, he thought Hannah had stayed at her desk, but after a few seconds he heard her footsteps behind him, and he stepped into the meeting room just ahead of her. The others were already waiting inside. Ove liked to keep the group small, and aside from Eric, there were 3 other detectives, 4 now, including Hannah. "Good," said Ove. "You're all here. This is our new team member, Hannah Dunker. She previously worked as a detective in Stockholm, and she's a fantastic interrogator." Something Eric didn't understand seemed to pass through the room. Amber straightened up and gave Hannah a curious glance. Daniel did the same. Karina simply turned to Ove and pursed her lips the way she always did when she was unhappy about something. Daniel had joined the group from patrol a year or so earlier, and they had all made a real effort to make him feel welcome. Karina slightly more than the others. She was old enough to be his mother. Hannah raised a hand in greeting and smiled cautiously. Eric hoped Ove wasn't planning to make her say anything, and he pulled out a chair and sat down. Clearly uncomfortable, Hannah did the same. Ove studied her for a few seconds. It looked like he was debating whether to say a few words himself, but eventually made do by asking them all to introduce themselves. "We've already met," said Eric. As ever, Amber made a joke about his surname, Mogadon. He liked to claim that none of the others could pronounce it properly, but Eric still couldn't hear the difference. He was fond of Amar, who was smartly dressed like always, in dark blue jeans and a jacket, his beard neat. Daniel kept things short and sweet, telling Hannah his surname, Lilja. Karina chose not to mention her surname, Hansen, but also to say that she was from Kalmar and had been working for the police here for over 20 years. "Thanks, everyone," said Ove. "Well, we might as well get started. We need to go back to the beginning with the assault outside the hotel." Ove turned to Hannah and explained that the victim had been so badly beaten that he now had to use a wheelchair. They had been investigating the attack for several weeks, but they still hadn't made much progress, partly because the victim himself couldn't remember what had happened. "I'll go through all the statements and see if there's anything we've missed," said Amber. Since he was the only member of the team who spoke Farsi, he had ended up shouldering most of the burden for the case. Like Amber, the victim was born in Iran. "There was a robbery outside the liquor store on Nora..." I didn't realize this book was going to be so much Swedish. "Langaten," Ove continued. a 22-year-old woman who was slashed on her way home from her boyfriend's house. She's in intensive care. Daniel, you talk to her boyfriend and find out if and when we can interview the woman." "Sure," Daniel replied, scribbling in his notepad. Amber leaned into Karina and whispered something. Her shoulders relaxed and she laughed. Of all of them, Amber was probably the one who took most responsibility for the other's well-being, and he had probably also sensed her dislike of their new colleague. "What was that?" said Ove. Amber looked up at him with feigned ignorance. "Would you like to share with the rest of the group?" But before Amber had time to reply, the door opened and the sergeant propped her head into the room. "We've got a dead body on Oland."